Welcome to the Wisdom of the Body Summit, an online event to align with your body's intelligence for healing, optimal living, and spiritual awakening. Brought to you by Sounds True. Throughout this summit, 32 experts will share practical tools and breakthrough insights that have emerged from the convergence of science and time-honored perspectives from the world's spiritual traditions. As we learn to recognize and honor the incredible wealth of knowledge that lies within our bodies, we can begin to listen and attend to ourselves more fully, opening a doorway to greater health and well-being.
Welcome, everyone, to Sounds True's Wisdom of the Body online series. My name's Tammy Simon, and it is a joy and an honor to be your host for this session. This very first session in our series features someone who's very dear to me and who really, truth be told, I credit with teaching me not just the practice of somatic meditation, which he's going to introduce to you here in this session, but really knowing what it feels like to start to begin to live an embodied life. And I feel so grateful that we can begin this series with Reggie A here broadcasting from the Sounds True studio. Reggie is the co-founder of Dharma Ocean, which is an organization that's dedicated to the evolution and flowering of the somatic teachings of Tibetan Tantra. He's also the author of the book Touching Enlightenment, Finding Realization in the Body. And this session is on true wisdom is found in the body and nowhere else. It's my joy to welcome Reggie A.
In this series, we are exploring the wisdom of the body. And in this session, I want to share with you a tradition that focuses on the body and provides access to its wisdom in the fullest possible extent. And this is Tibetan tradition, and especially the tantric tradition and its most ancient history going back through Tibet into India. Sometimes things happen in life that we are completely unprepared for. And even they happen outside of any kind of context of our history, our life, our cultural expectations, our race, our gender, our ethnicity. It's almost like a missile from outer space. This happened to me in my 20s when I ran into the Tibetan tantric tradition, both in India and then later in the United States. And what was so out of context for me was that I was presented with a tradition that said that wisdom is found in the body. True wisdom is found in the body and nowhere else. And of course, as a Western person, I had grown up reading books, going to school, going to graduate school, and all the wisdom I had been exposed to was mental. It wasn't physical. So I ran into a Tibetan teacher who said, actually, you've got it upside down. The last 28 years of your life, you've actually had it backward. And if you're interested in finding out what true wisdom is, we can do that. So I signed on, and it's been an amazing journey of 40 44 years of exploring the body. So I want to share that with you today. I want to share this Tibetan tantric perspective. These days we're all interested in the wisdom of the body, and rightly so, because we have come to see that relying just on our thinking mind, relying just on the allopathic approach to reality, has not yielded very good results, especially in the last 100 years. We've gotten into a cul-de-sac. And although when you go to a bookstore, there are an amazing number of wonderful books, interesting books, exciting books, and many, many people who are delivering teachings of all kinds, somehow it's not making that much difference to our fundamental state of being. When I work with younger students now, people in their 20s and 30s, they're very, very different from my generation and even succeeding generations in one particular way. They do not look at spirituality as an interesting thing. They look at spirituality as their last resource. And they are coming and they're looking for something that will fundamentally change who they are and help them find fulfillment in their life. That's a very good thing. It's a very positive thing. And this is where the teachings of the body come in. So I want to make a few points about the Tibetan teaching on the wisdom of the body, and then we're going to do some practice. So the first thing about the wisdom of the body is, as I've said, it's not mental. You can't, let's say what you can't do. You can't put it into words. You can't put labels on it. You can't conceptualize it. You can't think logically about it. It's almost as if the body itself speaks in a language that does not translate into our thinking mind. Many of us in this culture have been brought up, as I was, to think that the only wisdom, the only knowledge, the only information that's worthwhile is information that can be translated into logical thinking, into terminology, into concepts, into intellectual conclusions, conceptual conclusions of some kind. But the body's not like that. According to the Tibetan tradition, the body itself speaks in a language, but the language it speaks in, for most of us, is a foreign language, and we actually have to learn it. The body itself communicates through, I would call somatic intuition, a felt sense. When we talk about, I have a gut feeling, that's not mental. That's very, very physical. When we say, my heart tells me that I have to do this, even though I think differently, that's the body speaking. When we feel we can't find our voice, we don't know how to express ourselves, and we feel constriction in our throat, the constriction is the body talking to us. The fact of the matter is the body is talking to us all the time. And as I want to suggest today, what it communicates is a vast world of reality to us. So let's talk a little bit about the Tibetan teaching on the body. So to begin with, there's something we have to talk about what the body is and what is the wisdom of the body ultimately, according to Tibetan tradition. Secondly, we have to talk about what does the body know? Let's talk about that. All of us have experienced in our life many times when the body is telling us things. But the thing is, what does the body know, actually? And then the third, and in a way the most interesting thing, is the body guides us. According to the Tibetan teaching, when we tap into the body, we find the most reliable and the most accurate guidelines for how to live our life. When I first heard that, it was very strange, kind of thing they were saying, but it's turned out to be so. So first of all, let's say, okay, what is the wisdom of the body in its full depth? The first thing is we have to understand that what we are talking about here is not a philosophy. It's not a set of propositions or hypotheses. What we're talking about here is direct experience. Direct experience means experience that we feel directly in our body. If we walk outdoors and we're suddenly hit with a blast of cold air, we feel that cold air instantly. There's no thinking process involved. If we come around a corner and we run into our beloved, our body lights up, or maybe our body gets angry, whatever the case may be. And that's not mediated through our mind. It's not like we decided, okay, now I see my beloved, and now I'm going to think about it. And the way I think is, I think that I feel happy. We don't do that. The body simply lights up or goes dark, depending on, what day it is and so on. So that's how it is when we talk about discovering the ultimate wisdom of the body. It's a discovery that is experiential. It's direct. It's somatic. It's in our body. And we're going to need tools and techniques to gain access to this inner experience of the body. With what is the body, number one, 2, what does the body know, and 3, what is the process of guidance of the body. With all of those, it's going to have to be a matter of direct experience, so we see for ourselves. So I'm outlining the view, you might say, or the perspective, and then we'll take a look with some of the practices. So when we first begin to pay attention to our body in a very deliberate way, and we're not doing it for any strategy. We're not doing it because we're working out or we're running. We're not doing it, for any external reason, except we're simply wanting to invite the body to show us what's going on, what it is. So when we first do that, it's kind of dark, and often we can't feel very much at all. But as we begin to pay attention, and as we begin to put our awareness into our body, we begin to feel, and sense what this body is and how it is with this body. All of a sudden, we begin to feel more, we sense more, and we begin to be able to feel what I would call the inner terrain of the body. In the Tibetan tradition, let's just jump right in, they have this concept called the hollow body. The hollow body is actually an experience that we need to discover for ourselves. When I first teach about the hollow body, or this first aspect of the wisdom of the body, people immediately think about the medical textbooks and what they know about anatomy, and the body is full of this, that, and the other thing. But what happens when we use practices of somatic meditation to feel into what does it actually feel like within my body. We feel sensations. We feel our blood running. We feel the contraction of our muscles. We feel the buzz of neurological activity. Well, that's very, very interesting. I never noticed that before. That's really interesting. Pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. And all of a sudden, a huge interior peacefulness opens up in our body, no matter what our situation, and no matter what our emotional state was a minute ago. And that inner peacefulness, that inner sense of utter rightness and utter ease, it unfolds further, and we begin to realize the interior of our body experientially is a vast field of space. And that space is alive and awake. And if we go further and we begin to feel, well, where is the boundary of my body? Where is my skin? You can't find it. You may be able to look at it and you can pinch yourself and get some kind of orientation. But if you feel the interior silence and the vast peace, you run into the empty body, open, empty, and free. This is a very shocking experience, and yet it's readily available, and it's actually the basis of Tibetan Tantra, that experience. So try to imagine what that's actually like. All of us in our life are looking, seeking, searching. And what we're searching for at the end of the day is ourselves. And what we're searching for is to find our true inner being, who we are as a person ultimately, and what it feels like to be a human being. We're looking. And honestly, I've been teaching for, it's shocking to me to say this, but I've been teaching this for 50 years, 50, long time. And I don't think I've ever met anyone that wasn't on this journey to try to find something, which is themselves. Ultimately, we are looking to be free, to be who we are, with no one coming down on us, not being crowded by reality, not being disrupted by distraction, to be free. And the fascinating thing about the empty body, this experience of interior reality that is completely empty and open, is that it is the most profound experience of freedom and well-being that we could ever have as a human. We totally relax into that interior space. And as I said, that space is alive. And that space is, what can we say? There's such a sense of presence and such a sense of power in that space. That is the ultimate wisdom of the body. And the reason it's wisdom is because it is our ultimate intelligence, our ultimate awareness, our ultimate ability to experience our life and experience the world. That open space can receive anything and everything that happens to our life, and there's no problem. if you have a supernova in your living room, and that supernova goes off, it's going to be a big problem. It's going to, your living room is going to be history. But if that very same supernova happens in empty space, that supernova has room to expand and create the most beautiful patterns and the most beautiful waves of energy and the most amazing expressions of power. Well, our fundamental energy as human beings is just like that. We ourselves are a supernova in process, an exploding star. And we, at the same time, are so imprisoned by other people, yes, by society, yes, but most of all by our own selves and by our expectations and our belief systems. We hold ourselves in this tiny little box. Meantime, the supernova wants to explode. Once we touch the empty body and we realize that our fundamental state of being as a human is vast, open, all-receiving awareness, that it's infinite space, we realize there's room for anything that we are or will ever be to happen without comment, without restriction. And we realize that that exploding star, which is ourselves, is actually our purpose in being on the planet. So, we're talking here about the wisdom of the body. And the first and most important part of it is discovering this wisdom is our very, very foundation as a human being. It's our ground. And out of that vast empty space, our whole life has emerged. And our whole life rests in that fundamental state of freedom. When you touch the wisdom of the body at that level, then it takes a lot of pressure off. Because you no longer have to find your freedom, because you discover it was always here. And now you're touching it and you're tasting it, you're reveling in it, and you're flying in it. That's why in the Tibetan tradition they say that once you touch this empty, open, vast foundation of your own being, immediately you become infinitely loving, because you're no longer having to protect yourself or feed yourself or aggrandize yourself in any way. You're free to love. There's a Western analogy that some of you may know about. There's a neuroscientist named Jill Bolte Taylor who wrote a very well-known book called My Stroke of Insight. And in the course of that book, which if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend that you take a look, she talks about how her left brain, which is our thinking mind, we're talking about, as I've been talking about, the body really is happening in a different place from this left brain. She suffered a massive left brain hemorrhage, which basically totally knocked out her thinking mind. Interesting. I mean, this is what we do in meditation over the long haul, is we learn how to set aside the thinking mind. And everything that I'm talking to you about happens as that process unfolds. But her case is fascinating because in her, it happened in a space of about 5 minutes. And what she describes in the book is her body, how her body felt, how she experienced her body when her thinking mind had been taken offline through the stroke, rather than meditation. And what she says is she realized that her true body was as extensive as space. And her true body included within that vast space everything that was happening in the universe. Her account is eloquent and very pertinent to what we're talking about here. Except in this case, we're talking about what happens when, through the practices of somatic meditation, we are able to come into our body, which automatically means setting aside our thinking mind, because the two don't go together, and how it is for us when we do that. And she describes a sense of tremendous freedom, tremendous joy, just as we find in the Tibetan texts, and how it changed her whole life. Of course that would. So the empty body, or we could say the empty open awareness, that is our fundamental state of being. In Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism, is called the Dharmakaya. Dharma means ultimate truth, kaya means body. And we're told in that tradition that that is actually the point of meditation, is to discover this ultimate, eternal, timeless, infinite body that is our fundamental body, our fundamental experience of embodiment. So I mentioned there was a second aspect also to this, to the wisdom of the body. So number one is the empty, open awareness, the knowing quality. And the second point is what, the second part of the wisdom of the body is what that fundamental, infinitely intelligent and awake and aware foundation of ourselves, what does that know? How is that related to the ordinary life that we live, to the reality of the world around us? And this is something that may be connecting in with you and your experience if you have done some body work. So when we rest, when we rest in our basic nature, you could say, or in our ultimate body, and we look out at the world, we see the world in a completely different way. Completely different way. What we see is things from their own side. Meaning, let's take the example of a person that we love. Normally, for all of us, we fall in love, which is actually a moment of seeing the person as they are. It's not an illusion by any means. The moment of falling in love is when something happens and we are blown up, our thinking mind is blown up, and we actually see the other person truly, and we see how amazing and sacred and beautiful they are, and it stirs our heart and it stirs our body. That is a true experience. This is not an illusion. But then the next thing that happens is we get in a relationship and, time goes by, maybe years go by, and we cover over that original experience. We cover over what our ultimate body knew and still knows, with all kinds of pain and defensiveness and moments of breakthrough, and then, we're lost again, habitual patterns, game playing, all the things we do in relationships. And the reason we do it is that we can't stay in our deepest soma, which is another word for body. We can't stay in our deepest body, and we can't stay in our ultimate body in that empty open space where that person first appeared in our field of experience. And this is the way it is in our whole entire life, that we have always the immediate possibility of that fundamental openness of what we could call the basic body. But we depart from it. It's too open. It's too vast. It's too vulnerable. We can't control things when we rest in that freedom. And so we habitualize all of our experience. And we do not see things as they are anymore. Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism makes a big point about we need to see things as they are. And what they mean is we need to see things without the filtering, defensive, paranoid mechanisms of the ego. When we abide in the ultimate body, we begin to notice a world that is so fantastic and so interesting and so surprising. And everything that happens becomes some kind of statement on the part of the universe about how things are. William Blake talks about the universe appearing in a raindrop. Well, this is not a metaphor. The universe discloses itself, the totality of the universe, where everything is interconnected, discloses itself to us, human beings, in its totality, in each of the experiences we go through in life. And we're not talking about like some kind of mystical thing. We're talking about being in King Soopers and looking for cornflakes. We're talking about getting a flat tire on the highway on the way to work. We're talking about cleaning the baby poop and the smell of the baby poop and the whole scene. We're talking about the baby keeping us up all night. And we're talking about things that we normally think of as happy and joyful. We're talking about everything. The point is that in our normal life, we think nothing means anything. When things happen to us, we think we have to add some kind of special philosophical interpretation to find out what it means. In the Tibetan Vajrayana, the way you find out what it means is you let it tell you. To do that, you have to have a mind that is empty and open and free. You have to have a state of being that is resting and fulfilled and, dare I say, blissful. When you touch the ultimate body of yourself, the experience is one of utter relaxation, utter well-being, and utter blissfulness. And as I said, when you are free in that way, you're free to experience everything exactly as it is. So one thing that has happened to me in the last few years, I've been doing a little bit of traveling, and then I come back home and I go into retreat down in my retreat cabin in the mountains of southern Colorado. And every single time, traveling is wonderful, and it throws you off in a very good way, and you have to kind of, constantly see what's going on. Very helpful. It's very good. I think it's a lot of spirituality in traveling. But whenever I come home, I sit in my retreat cabin and I look out. I look at the mountains. I look at the sky. I watch the birds, come to my bird feeder. And everything that happens. The weather is always changing. The clouds come in and out, and I can see across the valley. I can see storms 90 miles away across the valley happening, and then I look somewhere else and there's sunlight. But basically, it's ordinary life. And I feel, and this happens every single time, I feel this is so much more nourishing and rewarding and joyful than any of the traveling. And many times, during any particular retreat I might be doing, I say to myself, I would rather be here than any place else in the world. And you will hear that from retreatants. There's a woman, a very good woman, a Tibetan nun named Tenzin Palmo, who wrote a book called Cave in the Snow. She talks about being up in this cave at, 14,000 feet by herself in winter, couldn't get out, got sick. She picked the wrong cave. It was too wet. And she said at a certain point, she was miserable and really feeling sorry for herself. And all of a sudden, she looked around and she suddenly realized, the Buddha said everything is suffering. The Buddha said you can never escape from suffering. And this is what the Buddha said, this is how it is. Life is always unsatisfactory. And she relaxed into it, and suddenly she realized, I never, ever want to be any other place than in this cave, in this situation. So, coming back to kind of ourselves, what the body knows is truly how things are. And it helps us cut through our discursive mind, our preconceptions, our assumptions about how everything is. When we come into the body, when we feel the space inside the body, when we enter into that peaceful stillness, we begin to see that each moment of our life is actually very rich and very full and extraordinarily sacred. There's a saying in Tibetan tradition, there's a term called kusulu, which is actually a Sanskrit term, but it's composed of 3 syllables, and what they say is, when you actually figure out what's going on, there are only actually 3 things you need to do. You can let go of everything else, because in these 3 things is everything. Number 1 is eat. Number 2 is sleep. And number 3 is shit. Kusulu. That means a person who is free from all searching, all struggling, all fighting to get what they want, because what they want is actually already here. You might say, what is the practical impact of this second dimension? So just to review. So the first dimension of the wisdom of the body is the open, all-knowing awareness that we discover experientially in our body through the practices. And then the second one is what the body knows, which is things as they truly are, things from their own side, things in their fullness, things that have not been, sort of hacked apart by our thinking, labeling mind. Things in their livingness. There's a saying in Tibetan Buddhism that when you see things, you see their life. And when you label them and think about them, they're already dead. They're like the butterfly that's pinned to the board. So the practical utility, if you would like to put it that way, of number 1 is you taste and discover and fly in your own freedom. The practical utility of wisdom of the body, number 2, is that it makes you so accurate in terms of working with people, working with situations. You're not seduced by your own ego freakouts, your own being triggered, your own activation, your own trauma responses. You are able to be instead of putting a lot of barriers between yourself and the other person, mental barriers, you're able to actually be naked and present, and you experience them with utter simplicity and directness. And then the compassion, as I said, is natural. You know, it's a natural outflow. Then we come to the third aspect of the wisdom of the body, which is the practical guidelines of how to live one's life. And what I mean by that is that, when the fundamental openness of number one is there, and we begin to see things really from their own side, we see what things are, we see how things are, then we begin to find in our experiences that the body provides guidelines. Now, this is a difficult thing to understand without the direct experience. But what I'm talking about here is that when let me give you an example. Let's say we run into a very problematic situation, challenging situation, say with another person. It could be our partner, it could be a child, it could be a work situation, very problematic. And we get angry, or we get upset, or we start feeling bad, or we start, hating ourselves. We have some kind of strong emotional reaction to that situation. The normal habitual human tendency is to label, let's say you're at work and somebody's trying to undermine you, label that person as bad. You become angry. And if you happen to be a wrathful nature, there are a number of different natures that we all have: passionate, wrathful, prideful, paranoid, different natures. If you happen to be of a wrathful nature, you may start thinking about retaliating. But basically what we all do is we label things that make us uncomfortable, and then we start thinking about them, and we start attributing stories to them. And then we set them in the narrative of our whole life. And what's happened here is we have disconnected from what our body knows completely, and we have dissociated, in fact. So the practice at this point is to come back to the body, okay? Coming back, feeling into the body. And when you feel into your body, your thinking mind goes offline. Meaning that to be in the body is incompatible with being completely locked up in the thinking mind. Likewise, to be locked up in the thinking mind, the strategizing mind, the storytelling mind, the narrativizing mind, is to be disconnected from the body. It's just basic neurobiological fact. The being in the body is when the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest, repose, healing default, that goes with being in the body. And when that's happening, when the parasympathetic nervous system is activated, the sympathetic nervous system, which is associated with the thinking mind, is offline. It's gone. And it works the other way around. When we get into our fight and flight response, sympathetic nervous system is activated by threat. That's associated with a lot of thinking. So we come into the body and we begin to track what's going on in the body. So we're leaving aside the storyline, the narrative, coming into the body and feeling the energy of the space in our body. And strangely enough, it's like a tide a tide moving, that energy in the body moves, and that energy is what's underlying actually the freak out and all the thinking. So we're getting at the underlying cause of our disconnection by coming back to the body. And strangely enough, that energy moves, and if you stay with it, this is something Peter Levine talks about quite a bit, you stay with the energy of the body, it actually goes somewhere, and it resolves the situation, and it brings us back to knowing and seeing what's really going on, and not just being locked up in our obsessive thinking. So that's one way in which the third aspect, we could call it the practicality of wisdom of the body. That's one way it works. It helps us work through pretty much any situation that comes up for us that is difficult for us and problematic and confusing. And the other aspect is in any and every situation, when we have a question, an uncertainty about our direction, we can come into the body, and the body tells us, strangely enough, the body shows us what it knows about the situation. If you want to read a little bit more about this, you can read a very good book by David Rome called The Body Knows the Answer. And if you want to go further reading, you can read Eugene Gendlin, the founder of a tradition called focusing. And this is what they both say, is that the body actually, in a weird way, holds, I hesitate to say it. I mean, I'm afraid what you may think, but the body actually knows everything that is going on, past, present, and future. Genuine people who tell the future, it's because they know how to tap into the body's knowledge of the future. So this, you can use this all the time. Even when I go to the store, and I'm not sure, I'm looking at all these different apples, and I check in with my body, and even at that mundane level, my body will, suddenly I'll have a certain feeling, almost like my body comes alive when I look at a certain apple, and I know that's going to be the best one. You can do it with food, you can do it with trying to figure out what job you want, and so on. So what I'm getting to is the body at the most fundamental level it's our teacher. The body is our guru. The body is our guide. And it's completely unlike human teachers who are, always a mixed bag, and human authorities, which are always, useful, maybe not, questionable. The body is actually our direct access to what is truly real. And in order to live our life, we need that access. We need to touch our own fulfillment. We need to see things as they truly are. And we need practical guidance in everyday life. This is not the same kind of guidance that someone outside would provide to us at all. It's actually what we already know. How many times have students said to me, when we'll sit down together, we'll talk about a problem, and we'll get somewhere, and the student will say, "Oh, actually, I already knew that. I actually already knew it," and they did know it. I see my job as a teacher as nothing more or less than helping people to come to the knowledge that's already within them, because it is already there. And sometimes I can see it before they can, and sometimes it's a mutual discovery, and sometimes they discover it and I don't. But it's always the same kind of process. So in the Tibetan tradition, we have this amazing teaching of the wisdom of the body in a way that is utterly complete, and that, frankly, when you tap into this, you do not need a spiritual tradition. You don't need other people telling you what to do. As one of the great practitioners in this tradition once said, somebody said, why don't you read books? And he goes, why would I read books? Phenomena are all the books I need. My body is the only book that I need. So, wisdom of the body, it's everything. And the unique and powerful part of Tibetan Buddhism is that it shows us, gives us practices to gain access to that very wisdom. In what I've said up to this point, several times I've mentioned that somatic meditation is the way in which we gain access to the wisdom of the body. So at this point, I want to do some meditation with you. And this is a happy moment for me because this is actually what I do. I teach somatic meditation. And everything I've said up to this point provides a kind of context for you and gives you some understanding. But as I said before, until we actually experience what I've been teaching, it doesn't mean much. It's not going to be that helpful. So there are many what we call somatic protocols, many different somatic practices that help us come into the body and develop the kind of interior awareness, interior knowledge that we're looking for. There are many different practices that help us explore the internal landscape of the body. At this point, I'm going to show you one of the most important and also one of the simplest, just to give you a sense of what we're talking about here. This is called 12-fold lower belly breathing. It's something that I teach quite extensively when I teach somatic meditation. And again, it comes from the Tibetan tradition. This particular practice helps us come into our body, first of all, as you'll see, and it quiets the thinking mind. And then it enables us to enter rather quickly into this interior geography of the body, the interior landscape. So the way the practice works, you can do this sitting up or lying down. I'm going to do it sitting up with you. We begin to breathe into the lower belly. So the way this practice begins, we're going to begin to breathe into the lower belly. So let me show you how that works. So we're going to pick a spot midway between the perineum and the navel. And it's going to be on the midline. And that spot is going to be back maybe an inch or an inch and a half from the front of the lower belly. Now we're just imagining that spot, just an imaginary spot. But by imagining it, it's going to help us breathe into it in the way that we need to. So when I say breathe into the lower belly, I'm not talking about breathing from the nostrils down into the lungs and then bringing the breath down. I'm talking about imagining or visualizing that you're bringing your breath when you breathe in, you're bringing your breath directly to that place in the lower belly. So let's just try that for a minute, just breathing naturally and gently. We're just trying to get a general feel here for what that might feel like to breathe into the lower belly. And notice as you breathe into the lower belly in this way, or you imagine you're breathing into the lower belly in this way, just breathing directly into that spot, notice that the rest of your body actually starts to relax. There are several different practices that we can do going from this point, and I'm going to show you the one that I just described. So we're going to take a medium to full in-breath into the lower belly, and then we're going to exhale very, very completely, basically pulling the front of the lower belly, collapsing it back toward the spine. So we're sort of tightening down the lower belly to the point as far as we possibly can. And as the Tibetans say, we're exhaling stale prana, stale chi, stale energy. So let's just do one breath. So medium to full in-breath, and by the way, these breaths are done slowly. Medium to full in-breath into the lower belly, breathe in, and then breathe out. And then breathe in again. Okay, so let's do 3 of these so you can see how they work in context or in a series. So we're going to breathe into the lower belly, medium to full in-breath, and then we're going to breathe out, breathe out, breathe out, breathe out, breathe out, breathe out, until you've exhaled every cubic millimeter of breath, or it feels like that. Okay, so 3 breaths. Please begin. And then breathe naturally. And then feel your body. Come back and just feel what your body feels like. Relax into it. Let go of your thinking. Just drop your awareness down into your body. Okay, very good. Now we're going to do 12. Same exact process. So when you're ready, please begin. Now, as you're continuing on the out-breath, you can tighten your perineum and tighten your anal sphincter and pull the front of your lower belly back toward the spine on the out-breath. And as you get to 12, you can lengthen that exhale. And then just breathe naturally. And feel your body, feel the energy. And feel the stillness, actually. The body is very still. Meantime, there's energy in the space. And now move your awareness back along your spine. So you're feeling your spine. You're feeling the cervical spine. You're feeling the back of your throat. And notice how still it is. And notice how totally relaxed it is. Open, empty, bright. Okay, so let's do another set of 12-fold lower belly breathing. Please begin when you're ready. So on the out-breath, we're tightening the anal sphincter. We're tightening and pulling up in the perineum. And you can add the detail of pulling your pubic bone back toward your spine and rolling your back over just a little bit. So let's do a few more together, and this time I want you to look at your own mind, look at your awareness, look at the space in your body as you're doing this. So 3 more. And then once again, breathe naturally. And feel your breath. As you breathe in through your nostrils, feel the breath at the back of your palate. And be right with that sensation. And then imagine you're opening up the back of your neck and you're extending your awareness a little bit behind your body. And notice the quality of the space in your body. And totally relax into it and let go. We're relaxing backward. We're falling into the fundamental body, the boundless body, the infinite body of awareness. And notice the freedom in it. Free, open, empty, vast. And keep opening backward. And see if you can notice the brightness of that space. It's bright. It's like empty space suffused with sunlight. But it's brighter than that. You might even notice a diamond-like quality to that brilliant, open, fundamental body of reality. So we're developing a sense of our own freedom and fulfillment. We're developing a sensing organism, our body, that begins to experience things in a much fuller and more true way. And when you do the practice I've just shown you, you may find things, you may find out a lot of things in your ordinary life. A lot of things about people, even you know very well, that you never knew. The more we train in abiding in our body in this way, the more our sense of direction we pick up from our somatic intuition, from our felt sense, from what the body knows to be so, rather than from what we think. It just happens very naturally. And then we enter a beautiful dance with our lives. And strangely enough, we discover that as we move through life, everything that happens, our happiness, our sorrow, our successes, and especially our failures, everything has this mark of being so right and so good and so healthy and so encouraging of our unfolding as a human person. And at the end of the day, it dawns on us that the body is a living, intelligent, all-loving presence to our little struggling, suffering ego mind. And the body has an intention toward us. And that intention is that our life unfolds in the way that it needs to, so much bigger than driven by our ego hopes and fears. At that point, there's a very, very deep relaxation. And that we, strangely enough, we are being held in the most profound and beautiful and loving way by our own human body. We are loved, we are protected, we are guided in life, and also as we come to see in death. The only thing the body asks of us is that we surrender our puny, little self-defensive, narcissistic version of reality known as the ego. Surrender it to the body, and then the ego becomes the servant of the body at that point. So please take these teachings and these practices and explore them and see what you find out for yourself. Test them in the fire of your own experience and allow the thread of your own life that opens up out of them to guide you into your uniqueness, into your true and full personhood, into the being that you were born to become. And if you do that, you will fulfill everything that this ancient tradition has for you and for all people.
Welcome, friends. I now have Reggie here in the studio and the chance to ask him a few questions.
Beautiful.
Okay. So in your talk, true wisdom is found in the body and nowhere else. It's this nowhere else thing that caught my attention. Mm-hmm. And part of what got my attention is you talked about the very first part of this view of the wisdom of the body that you wanted to share with us, asking a question of what is the body? And you described the body as this open, fundamental openness type experience. And as we were doing the practice, and also even as I was just listening to you talk, I felt that. I felt this huge, endless, open sense of being.
Yeah.
But then I thought, a lot of people don't have that experience, particularly in their body. They have that experience maybe when they're having an out-of-body experience of some kind, or maybe they'll report that in a near-death experience, that they're way out in outer space and they finally have a sense of timelessness. So help me understand the body as fundamental openness, when most people, I think, don't have that experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I could state the analogy of falling in love. Years ago when I was teaching at the University of Colorado, a female student came in very upset because her biology professor had told her love is nothing but the interaction of chemicals. That's all it is. It has no meaning. And what she said was, he doesn't know what love is. I mean, he may know from the outside what it is, but because he's never experienced it, he doesn't know. And yet there are billions and billions and billions of people who know exactly what love is because they've experienced it. And if someone were to ask me what is love, I would say, or how do I know what love is? The way you find out is by falling in love or by loving somebody. You have to have the experience. And I would say with the body, it's the same thing, that we have a lot of ideas about the body, but we haven't taken the time, or maybe we haven't known how to see what the actual experience of the body is, just the way the experience of love. Ultimately for the human person, what changes you is your experience of things, not what you know about things, as we know from Eugene Judlin's work and Peter Levine and other people. So then what? What are you asking me?
What I'm asking you is, I think a lot of people have a sense of fundamental openness by leaving the body.
I understand.
By having some kind of transcendent experience of some kind.
Yeah.
And yet you're describing that as the very nature of the body. But why do I need the body for that experience? I can go have fundamental openness by, listening to some weird binaural beats and leaving my body and going up into, big open space.
Well, let me offer the Tibetan perspective. The only way that we can truly experience anything is actually in our body. Anything else is a mental experience or imaginary experience. So, even in terms of neurobiology, we know that there are two ways we know things. One is we know them in our body somatically with our senses and our feeling and our felt sense. And the other way we know is, and that's called primary knowledge. And the other one is we think about what we experience in our body. And I think the Tibetan tradition would say out-of-body experiences are basically just going into, they're just a much more sophisticated level of the thinking mind. They're delusional, they've isolated themselves from the literal experience of the body, and it's not real experience. And, as a teacher, I run into people all the time who have managed to get themselves into all kind of dissociated spaces that seem to be big and they seem to be peaceful, but they're completely disconnected from their actual human experience. And from the Tibetan point of view, that's just it's just another version of ego, even though it's dissociated. And we can look at psychotic episodes where people really do separate from the body. I mean, this is not true freedom. It's not true infinity. It's an idea of it. So, again, there are only two ways to know things: in our body or in our thinking. There is no third option.
Okay, well, can I push a little bit,
Yeah,
Reggie?
please.
Is that all right? You once said to me, it's fine to ask, don't throw me softball questions, but,
I did say that.
throw a sizzler.
And now
it's
the
okay.
karma's coming back.
That's right. This is the kind of thing that happens,
That's right.
But what about, is it possible that people in a near-death experience, let's say, are in a very, very subtle form of their body? So it's not so much the physical body or the thinking mind, but there is this third option, which is the subtle sensory realm.
Well, absolutely. And, when we did this practice we just did,
Yeah.
I asked you to feel the energy in the space, the quality of the space.
Yeah.
That's a more subtle level of the body. That is the body. It's very embodied because it's happening within the somatic sphere, and it's very direct, and you can feel it.
Yeah.
And the Tibetan tradition says that subtle body is what you experience in a near-death experience. It's still the body.
Right.
And that continues, and now we're really getting out there, but that body, which is the energetic aspect of the complete openness, that continues after we die.
Yeah. So this is all getting very interesting to me, because when we say that true wisdom lies in the body and nowhere else, that includes the subtlest form of our body.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think that's important.
Yeah. Another interesting point is, that energy that we experience when we do this, the practice we just did, the energy of awareness or the vitality or the brightness of awareness, that's actually the life force, interestingly. In other words, the basic space of the body, the empty body, is eternal. It isn't born, what they say, it isn't born and it doesn't die. It's always there. That body goes on after death, but so does the life force. And when we die, the life force it's in the energy of awareness, but it isn't manifest. And then when we're reborn, the life force again connects up, and we have a physical body.
Now, you said as sort of a fact that this subtlest form continues after our physical body dies.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that from your own experience? Not because the books say it, but how do you know that for realsy?
I know for realsy because whenever I'm in that space, there's energy there, and the energy, the brightness, the knowingness, those qualities of the empty body, they're actually part of the empty body. They're not separate from it. They're not an extra thing. And it's interesting. I don't know if you probably noticed this because you've done this practice a lot, but I wonder if any of our viewers noticed that when you're in that space, there is no sense of past, present, and future at all. It's almost like a timeless moment. It's called, in Tibetan Buddhism, it's called the fourth moment. Mm-hmm. And that fourth moment, really, you experience it as being outside of time. And then, of course, people who have near-death experiences will report that even though, the physical body is done for, supposedly, that sense of, and it's a very strong feeling. It's interesting. It's a somatic feeling. If you talk to people, it's bright, it's beautiful, it's blissful. I mean, these are things that only supposedly the physical body can have, and yet people experience that. It's weird, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's not what we would think.
Now, one of the things I want to talk to you about, and this is in service to our viewers, some of whom I think are coming to this series because they have some kind of illness of some kind, or their body is a source of suffering.
Yes.
Maybe they have chronic pain, something like that. Help me understand within the tantric tradition how you view illness and physical pain.
Again, this is a little outside the box in terms of Western thinking, but illness, strangely enough, is an expression of the health of the body. And by that I mean that when we experience illness and pain, we are called down out of our thinking mind into our physical being. And if we surrender to that, illness and pain are, how can I put it? We experience them as energy, but without interpretation. You know, a lot of the I think, freak out that we have when we're sick, it's not just how we feel, because a lot of it, you know, most of us go through cycles of feeling good and then feeling horrible. But when there's the attribute of illness attached to it, that's when the real suffering becomes, you know, almost intolerable because of the interpretation that we put on what we're going through. But as I was saying in, you know, in the talk and also the guided meditation, that we are able, when we're in our body, we're able to be with whatever is happening, and we're able to find in it the thread of our own life, of our own karma. Whether it's illness, whether it's pain, very few of us are actually completely free of illness and pain for any length of time. So, you know, I think it's the blessing is that we're able to drop underneath the interpretations and the narrative of I'm sick, I might die, you know, all of those things that really drive us crazy, literally, and find in whatever's going on in the body the unfolding of our own life. And, you know, I mean, the Tibetans say that life, and the Christians say it too, and the Jews say it, that death, you know, when you are truly with your experience, death is the gateway to larger life. And I don't think they're making it up. I think that is how it works. But we have such strange attitudes towards illness and death, especially in the Western world. It's we regard it as like punishment or something.
Now, another thing
Yes.
that I wanted to ask you about was the third point that you made in your talk, is that we can turn to our body for practical guidance.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So let's say somebody who's listening has a question. They need guidance in their life about this or that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
do I stay or do I go? Whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
How can they work, whether it's with an aspect of somatic meditation or just turning to their own felt experience to receive the guidance they need?
That's a great question. I'll give an example. I was in a new relationship a number of years ago, quite a few years ago, and I had real questions about it. Like, is this the right thing? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? And, you know, I compared it with a previous relationship, and, you know, is it as good? You know, all those things that we have when we're in a new relationship, we're not quite sure. And so the technique, and you can apply this anywhere, is, first of all, I brought up the new relationship, and I just sort of visualized this person, and I asked my body, you know, what about this? You know, how do you respond to this? And my body kind of lit up. And then I brought up my previous relationship, and I put that there, and I said, well, what about this? And, you know, have I been fooling myself that was really unworkable, and so on? And my body just became very dark, and I began to see just, you know, my body just showed me these things about the other relationship that really were not workable. You can also do it, one of the classic examples is you have a job offer in Oakland, and you live in Boulder. Let's say you live in Boulder and you have a job, but it's beautiful Boulder, Colorado, but, you know, it's a little boring, but it's so great. Boulder's like ideal, right, so to speak. And Oakland, you know, Oakland's a very troubled and difficult and dangerous place, and you have a job offer there. And your ego wants to play it safe. Your ego wants to stay in Boulder. I mean, why would I sacrifice Boulder, Colorado, and these beautiful mountains to go to Oakland, you know? Nothing against Oakland, but it's a city, you know. Mm-hmm. So you ask your body, what about, let's bring up Boulder. And the body goes, eh. And then you bring up Oakland, and there's a sense of kind of excitement and possibility and unknown, you know, possible surprises. And the body makes it very clear that that's your karma, you know, that is where your body and your life need to go. So it's really that simple. You put options, questions to your body, and you try different things and just listen and see what your body says. And the body will, the thing about the body, as you know, is when you ask questions, the body will speak. Mm-hmm. Our problem is we don't think to ask our body, so we don't get any information.
Mm-hmm. And it might speak in metaphors or in feelings or things like that.
Yeah, really mainly feelings.
Yeah. Okay, finally, Reggie, you know, I met you when I was 39 years old, which was 17 years ago.
Yes.
And I knew in being right here in the Sounds True studio and listening to you guide these meditations and participate in them, many of the protocols of somatic meditation, I knew it was something I really needed. Yeah. It was a missing part, a missing way of being here, belonging here as a human, being on the earth and being happy about being alive. I knew it was something I desperately needed. Yeah. And here we are 17 years later, Sounds True is putting on this series, The Wisdom of the Body. Mm-hmm. And it's becoming, in a certain way, kind of popularized. Mm-hmm. It's people are interested now.
Yes, they are.
Back then, I just knew it was something I needed, but most people were like, okay, whatever, Tammy's doing her thing. But now, we have this whole 30-part series, and quite honestly, we had hundreds of presenters that potentially we could have featured that wanted to be part of the series. Wow. Embodiment coaches are bringing embodiment to work. I mean, we're seeing this now all over. Wow. Yeah. And it's clearly there's a need in the culture.
Yes.
And the culture's caught on. Yeah. How do you see this really in terms of the time we're living in right now, 2019, and the wisdom of the body being seen as now a medicine that's needed by more and more people? How do you see that?
Well, I mentioned briefly the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, which, for human beings for the last 6 million years, going back to our original sort of ancestor, that's been only happens in situations of great danger. And the normal human thing is being at rest in the parasympathetic system and healing, resting, rejuvenation, peace, and human connection. What happens when we're in the fight or flight response, which is now the default of modern culture, is we disconnect from other people, we disconnect from our body, thinking ramps up, and our body's flooded with stress hormones, and it's incredibly unhealthy, both physically and psychologically, but that's the world we live in right now. I mean, people are, I'm telling you, the last few years working with all kinds of people are freaked out, and they don't know what to do about it, and they are, chronically disconnected from their own lives. And, experientially what that means is not only do relationships suffer and our health suffers, but we actually feel like we're not even living a human life anymore. And that is the dilemma of our time. And the body, my personal feeling is that traditional religions are not going to help us because they're a symptom of the situation. They are just as disembodied as all the rest of us. So traditional religions are out. I think as far as addressing this current modern epidemic, and I think the only answer is really to come back into our bodies and come back into our human experience. I don't see any other answer out there. And I think that the real question is whether, I'm very, very, very happy that hundreds of people are out there doing this and are offering these teachings. And I really hope the culture starts to respond, because I don't see any other way out, frankly, from where we're headed, which is down, down, down. One of the things that I think has happened to me and happens to other people, you begin to see what in your life actually causes you to disconnect, to be, upregulated all the time, to be in a state of, stress hormone flooding. And unfortunately, a lot of it is the internet and the electronic devices that we use. So even when people start to figure out what is destroying their health and their sanity and their relationships, the culture is so tied into it. I mean, I'd be curious what you think. I mean, is there any way out of that one?
Well, I think it's a good time to conclude our session and encourage our viewers to go take a walk outside someplace, touch a tree, feel the wind, connect internally, do some somatic meditation, which brings me to a final announcement that I want to make here, which is, like all of the sessions in our Wisdom of the Body series, you can re-watch or re-listen this if you want for free for the next 24 hours. You'd have to get back with your device to do so. So you may not want to do that. You might choose to purchase the entire series. You can watch them when you wish, if you want to, all the downloadable versions of the Wisdom of the Body series. And the announcement that I want to make is that Sounds True has created with Reggie a 2-volume program called Your Breathing Body, and it includes 19 different somatic meditation practices in it. And if you do choose to buy the downloadable version, you'll get all of those practices too, which is a way of answering your question, which is we can be disciplined, I think, in how we relate with our devices and use them for the powerful good things they offer, things like being able to learn somatic meditation and pull up on your iPhone a practice and hit it and do it. Very powerful. But it takes a lot of discipline to not use it as a way to just fritter away our precious hours here and surf endlessly and reread news headlines and get into the social media urinal, etc. So it takes a certain amount of discipline, and it is a type of practice. So that would be my answer to you.
Yeah, that's helpful. And what I want to add to that is that the more we do somatic meditation, the more our body tells us, yeah, this is fine. You can go on the internet now, or, oh, I'm going on because I've got some kind of emotional issue.
Yeah.
The body tells us. So the more we do it, the more the body helps us not do bad things.
Yeah. Yeah. Time to turn it off.
Time to turn it off.
It tells us. All right, then. And with that, over and out. Thanks, everyone. SoundsTrue.com. Waking up the world.